A tense confrontation erupted between Russia and the United States at the UN Security Council meeting on Tuesday, with both nations trading accusations of supporting terrorism amidst the escalating fighting in Syria. The conflict in Syria intensified following the capture of Aleppo by Syrian rebels led by the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham group, which is sanctioned by the UN Security Council. Deputy U.S. Ambassador Robert Wood urged for a de-escalation of the conflict and protection of civilians while criticizing Russia's involvement in the Syrian conflict.
The fact that HTS is listed as a terrorist organization by the U.S. and UN does not justify the further atrocities by the Assad regime and its Russian backers. Since November 27, these have included attacks by the regime and its Russian backers on schools and hospitals in both Idlib and Aleppo, causing civilian casualties.
Russia's ambassador to the UN fired back, accusing the U.S. of failing to condemn terrorist attacks on Syrian civilians and questioning Washington's commitment to combating international terrorism.
You were unable to summon the courage to condemn a clear terrorist attack undertaken against peaceful civilians in peaceful Syrian cities who were laboriously seeking to establish peaceful life despite the hundreds of illegal unilateral sanctions imposed by your country.
This was countered by Robert Wood, who stated that Russia was not in a position to lecture on terrorism given its support for regimes sponsoring terrorism worldwide.
He is in no position to accuse the United States of supporting terrorist groups. The United States has for decades fought the scourge of terrorism and will continue to fight that scourge of terrorism. So the representative from the Russian Federation is in no position to lecture us on this issue, particularly when it props up regimes that sponsor terrorism around the world.
For more on this, we are being joined by Ben Aries, founder and editor-in-chief of BNE IntelliNews and also former Moscow bureau chief for the Daily Telegraph. He's joining us live from Berlin. Welcome back to WION. Thank you so much for joining us. Can you talk about the source of differences between the United States and Russia on the sudden escalation of fighting in Syria?
Well, it's very confused, and the showdown that we just saw in the UN, to me, is very reminiscent of the Cold War era, where both sides are trading barbs and accusations, but there's, to be frank, a lot of double standards going on here. They're both accusing each other of supporting terrorists, and it's because the US have designated Assad as a terrorist and vice versa. I mean, HTS is designated as a terrorist. It's actually a splinter group from Al-Qaeda, and it's also associated with ISI, and so is definitely, founded in terrorist groups. Nevertheless, from the American side, that they have been supporting the HTS. I mean, previously it was known as Nusra Front, and after it left the Al-Qaeda network, and the Americans funded it and trained it and gave it some ammunition and weapons in order to fight, because they were fighting against the Assad regime. On the other side, Assad has been accused of killing 500,000 people with chemical weapons. Nevertheless, Assad and Moscow are friends, and Assad invited the Russian forces into Syria during his struggle against the rebels, and they prevailed. There's been several years, 4 years, I think, of relative peace and quiet. And now the situation in Syria has become destabilized because that Assad was relying on both Russian and Iranian-backed forces from Iraq, from Hezbollah, in order to keep control of the country. Those forces have been drawn down because of the other conflicts, particularly in the Middle East and also Ukraine. And so the rebels here have taken the opportunity where their enemies inside Syria have been weakened to do this spectacular attack and take back Aleppo. And really, it boils down to that. I mean, both sides accusing each other of supporting terrorists, but actually, when you strip away the veneer, this is just big power politics where both sides, the Russians and the Americans, are using proxies in order to fight a war in Syria to, extend their interest there. The Americans want Assad out, and the Russians have benefited from their relationship with Assad and want to keep him in.
And what are the prospects for de-escalation in the Syria conflict at this point? And how do you see this conflict shaping in the near future? Where do we go from here?
Well, like I say, until the war in Ukraine ends, that Russia is very thinly stretched. It was relying in Syria on some of its special forces. Those have been withdrawn. A lot of equipment has been withdrawn for the Ukrainian operation, which is throwing everything into and is like, desperately short of everything. At the same time, the Wagner private military company, that was being heavily used, but since its leader, Prigozhin, died or killed in a plane crash, and Wagner has been broken up, then that has ceased to be an effective force. And that was one of the Russians' main forces in the Syrian conflict, was Wagner. They were relying on it in order to train the Syrian army and to also provide military backup. And at the same time, Iran is also distracted because of its conflict with Israel. And Hezbollah, which is Iranian-backed, they've also been withdrawn back to Lebanon, where the Lebanese have been fighting with the Israelis, have been running a bombing campaign in southern Lebanon, although there's a shaky ceasefire in place at the moment. And so for the short term, until these other conflicts die down, then the resources that both of these players, Iran and Russia, would want to send back to stabilize things in Syria are simply not available. So for the short term, I think it's going to remain unstable because HTS is going to take advantage of this weakness in order to solidify the gains it's already made. And their goal, unlike Al-Qaeda, is specifically to take control of Syria, oust Assad, and impose an Islamic regime in Syria itself. And so that, I think, is going to continue. I mean, stepping back, we could say, look, we've worried about a broader war in the region, starting with Hamas attacks. And I think we're starting to see exactly that.
Thank you so much for all of those comments, Ben, and that analysis. I look forward to speaking to you again very soon as these stories in the region develop one by one.
My pleasure.
For all the latest news, download the WION app and subscribe to our YouTube channel.